There's a moment in every person's life when they realize the game has been rigged from the beginning. Not rigged against them, but rigged by those who understand something fundamental about human nature that most refuse to acknowledge. It's the moment when you discover that the loudest voices in the room are usually compensating for the emptiest souls, and that true power moves in silence, like a predator through tall grass. You've been taught to believe that authenticity means wearing your heart on your sleeve, that vulnerability is strength, that sharing your struggles makes you relatable. These are beautiful lies designed to keep you manageable. Because while you're busy broadcasting your every emotion, someone else is watching, learning, and accumulating the very power you're hemorrhaging through your desperate need to be understood. The ancient masters knew this. Machiavelli wrote that everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. But here's what most miss about that observation. It's not just about deception. It's about the mathematics of influence. Every word you speak is a transaction. Every emotion you display is currency being spent. And most people are bankrupt before they even realize they were wealthy. Let me show you what I mean with surgical precision. You're in a meeting. Your colleague, threatened by your recent successes, decides to challenge your competence in front of the entire team. They lean forward with that predatory smile and say, "I'm just wondering if you actually have the experience to handle a project of this magnitude." I mean, we've all seen the kind of mistakes that happen when someone gets promoted too quickly. The room holds its breath. Everyone expects you to defend yourself, to list your qualifications, to match their aggression with righteous indignation. This is exactly what weakness does. It reacts, it explains, it justifies. But you don't. You let the silence stretch for exactly 3 seconds. Long enough for the discomfort to settle into their bones, but not long enough to seem like you're struggling for words. Then you turn toward them with the kind of calm that makes predators nervous. Your voice, when it comes, is quieter than before, which forces everyone to lean in. "That's an interesting perspective," you say, letting each word land with deliberate weight. Then you turn back to the presentation materials in front of you, as if they've already been dismissed from your consideration. Now, regarding the Q3 projections. You don't defend, you don't attack, you don't even acknowledge the challenge as worthy of a real response. You demonstrate, through your very lack of reaction, that they don't possess enough social currency to purchase your attention. The room shifts. Power has moved, silently and completely. But here's where it transcends simple workplace politics and enters the realm of psychological warfare. What you've just done is demonstrate what the great strategists call terrible mercy, the kind of restraint that's more terrifying than any punishment because it suggests capability held in reserve. You've shown that you could destroy them, but they're not worth the energy. Your colleague will spend the next 3 days replaying that moment, wondering what you're planning, what you know about them that they don't know you know. They'll start watching you differently, speaking more carefully around you, unconsciously granting you the very respect they were trying to undermine. This is the mathematics of dominance. Sometimes the most devastating response is no response at all. This principle scales across every domain of human interaction. Your ex-partner texts you 17 times after midnight, alternating between apologies and accusations, desperately trying to extract some emotional reaction that will confirm you still care enough to engage with their chaos. The weak response is to match their energy, to explain why they're wrong, to defend your boundaries with lengthy paragraphs. The powerful response is to read every message and respond to none of them. Not out of spite, but out of a deeper understanding that attention is the oxygen that feeds their dysfunction. 3 weeks later, they'll send a single text. "I respect what you're doing." Power recognized. Transaction complete. But let's examine the deeper architecture of this philosophy, because what we're really discussing isn't just tactical communication. It's the complete reconstruction of how you exist in the world. Most people live their lives as emotional refugees, constantly seeking validation, approval, and recognition from sources outside themselves. They've externalized their sense of worth to such an extent that they become hostages to other people's opinions. The Machiavellian understands that this is the fundamental weakness that makes manipulation possible. The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves, Machiavelli observed. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves. But the modern translation of this wisdom goes deeper. You must become psychologically self-sufficient to the point where other people's attempts to destabilize you simply have nothing to grab onto. Consider the social media battlefield, where most people hemorrhage their power through reactive posting, defensive comments, and the desperate need to have the last word. You post something thoughtful about a complex topic. Within hours, strangers and acquaintances alike are in your comments, misrepresenting your position, attacking your character, demanding that you defend viewpoints you never actually expressed. The amateur gets drawn into the fight. They spend their evening crafting responses, getting increasingly frustrated as bad faith actors continue to twist their words. They go to bed angry, wake up checking their phone, and start their day already depleted by strangers who extracted their emotional energy for free. The professional recognizes this as an obvious trap. They post their content and then disappear from the conversation entirely, not because they can't defend their position, but because they understand that engaging with intellectual dishonesty only gives it power. They let their original statement stand as their complete response to the chaos below it. But the master uses this dynamic as a tool. They craft their original post with the precise knowledge that it will trigger certain types of people to reveal themselves in the comments. They don't respond to the chaos, but they study it. They learn who can think clearly under pressure and who cannot. They identify allies and enemies based on how people behave when they think no one important is watching. They turn the entire interaction into intelligence gathering while giving up nothing of themselves. A week later, when someone asks them about the controversy, they respond with genuine confusion. "Oh, did something happen with that post? I don't really monitor comments. If someone has something important to say to me, they know how to reach me directly." This isn't dismissiveness. It's the casual demonstration of a completely different relationship with social validation. Here's exactly how you execute this kind of psychological positioning in intimate relationships, where the stakes are highest and the manipulation most subtle. Your partner comes home from a difficult day and immediately begins criticizing everything about your shared space. The dishes aren't done the way they like them. You've left something in the wrong place. Your very presence seems to irritate them, and they're using you as an emotional dumping ground for frustrations that have nothing to do with you. The reactive response is to defend yourself, to point out that you're not responsible for their bad day, to match their energy with your own frustration. This gives them exactly what they're unconsciously seeking: confirmation that they can control your emotional state, that their chaos can become your chaos. The controlled response is different. You listen without defending. When they pause for breath expecting your rebuttal, you simply say, "It sounds like you've had a really difficult day. I'm going to give you some space to process that." Then you actually leave the space, not storming out, but calmly removing yourself from their emotional vortex. You don't explain where you're going or when you'll be back. You don't try to fix their mood or take responsibility for it. You treat their emotional instability the same way you'd treat a small child's tantrum, with calm recognition that this is something they need to work through themselves. This approach does something powerful. It forces them to confront their own behavior without you becoming part of the problem. Within an hour, they'll likely be texting you apologies, because your refusal to engage with their chaos highlighted just how unreasonable they were being. They'll start to associate their emotional outbursts with you becoming unavailable, which naturally reduces the frequency of such episodes. But more importantly, you've established a psychological framework where your peace is non-negotiable. You've communicated, without saying it directly, that they're welcome to have whatever emotions they need to have, but they're not welcome to use you as their emotional punching bag. This is boundary setting at its most sophisticated level, not through confrontation, but through consistent demonstration of what you will and will not accept. The philosophy goes deeper than tactics, though. What we're really discussing is the cultivation of what the ancients called ataraxia, unshakability. It's a state of being where your emotional center remains stable regardless of the chaos swirling around you. This isn't emotional numbness or sociopathic detachment. It's the development of an internal weather system so stable that other people's storms simply can't reach it. Think about the people in your life who seem to possess natural authority. Not the ones who demand respect through volume or aggression, but the ones who simply command it through their presence. They share certain characteristics. They speak less than others, but are heard more. They don't justify their decisions to people who aren't affected by them. They seem genuinely unbothered by criticism and unimpressed by praise. They don't chase opportunities or people. They create value and let opportunities and people come to them. These individuals understand something fundamental about human psychology. We assign value based on scarcity, and we respect what we cannot control. By making their attention, approval, and emotional reactions genuinely scarce, they increase their value in every interaction. By remaining fundamentally uncontrollable, they earn the kind of respect that cannot be demanded. This brings us to one of the most sophisticated applications of these principles: the art of strategic opacity. Most people feel compelled to explain themselves constantly, their decisions, their emotions, their motivations. They believe that transparency equals trustworthiness and that sharing equals connecting. But this level of openness makes them completely readable, and readable people are manipulable people. The strategically opaque person shares selectively and purposefully. They understand that mystery is magnetic and that the unknown is always more powerful than the known. When someone asks them why they made a particular choice, they might simply say, "It felt right," or "I had my reasons," without elaborating. This isn't rudeness. It's the recognition that you don't owe anyone access to your internal decision-making processes. Let me give you a concrete example. You decide to leave a well-paying job to pursue something that seems, from the outside, like a step backward. Everyone wants to know why. They probe with questions that seem supportive, but are actually requests for you to justify your choices to them. Are you sure this is smart? What about your financial security? Have you really thought this through? The defensive response is to explain your entire thought process, to seek their approval for your decision, to convince them that you're not making a mistake. This positions them as judges of your choices and you as someone who needs their permission to live your life. The powerful response is much simpler. "I'm excited about this next chapter." When they press for details, you remain pleasantly vague. "I've got a good feeling about it." If they continue pushing, you can redirect. "I appreciate your concern. How are things going with your project?" What you've done is maintained complete ownership of your decision while giving them nothing to argue with. You haven't provided enough information for them to poke holes in your logic or share their unsolicited opinions about your life. You've demonstrated that your choices aren't up for debate with people who aren't living with the consequences. 6 months later, when your risk pays off and you're clearly thriving, they'll remember that conversation differently. They'll remember that you seemed calm and confident when everyone else was worried. Your refusal to justify yourself will retroactively look like wisdom rather than stubbornness. This is how you build a reputation for good judgment, not by explaining your process but by consistently producing good results. But here's where this philosophy becomes truly dangerous, in the best possible way. Once you've developed this level of emotional self-sufficiency and strategic communication, you begin to see the social world as it actually is, rather than as you've been told it should be. You realize that most human interactions are power exchanges disguised as other things. Friendship often masks mutual exploitation. Romance frequently conceals elaborate control mechanisms. Professional relationships typically involve complex hierarchies of dominance and submission. This isn't cynicism. It's clarity, and with clarity comes choice. You can choose to engage with these dynamics consciously rather than being unconsciously controlled by them. You can play the game instead of being played by it. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But the modern translation of this principle is more nuanced. It's better to be respected than needed. When people love you, they expect access to you. When people need you, they resent their dependence. But when people respect you, they grant you space and autonomy while still wanting to be in your orbit. This is why the most powerful people in any social system are often the most enigmatic. They're present without being available. They're helpful without being indispensable. They're kind without being soft. They create value for others while maintaining clear boundaries around their own energy and attention. Consider the colleague who always volunteers for extra projects, stays late to help others with their work, and makes themselves available for every crisis. They believe they're building social capital, but they're actually training everyone around them to see them as a resource rather than a person. They've made themselves so available that their availability has no value. Compare this to the colleague who chooses their commitments carefully, delivers exceptional work on what they've agreed to do, and politely declines requests that don't align with their priorities. People quickly learn to bring only their most important requests to this person, which means every interaction is meaningful. Their scarcity creates value, and their reliability creates trust. The difference between these approaches isn't just tactical, it's philosophical. The first person operates from a scarcity mindset. They believe they must constantly prove their worth through availability and service. The second person operates from an abundance mindset. They believe their worth is inherent and demonstrated through the quality of their contributions, not the quantity of their availability. This philosophical difference shows up in every area of life. In romantic relationships, the scarcity-minded person tries to prove their love through constant availability, frequent communication, and the willingness to drop everything for their partner. They believe that love means having no boundaries and that devotion requires self-sacrifice. The abundance-minded person demonstrates love through consistency, reliability, and the maintenance of their own identity and interests. They understand that being a whole person makes them a better partner than being a partial person who has dissolved themselves into the relationship. Paradoxically, the second approach creates more attraction and deeper connection. People are drawn to those who have something to lose, who maintain their own center of gravity, who choose to be present rather than being compelled to be present. Love that comes from choice feels different than love that comes from desperation, even if the emotional intensity is the same. Now let's examine how this philosophy applies to the digital realm, where most people have completely lost control of their image and message. Social media has created a generation of people who live their lives as public performance, constantly seeking validation through likes, comments, and shares. They've turned themselves into content creators for an audience that includes everyone from close friends to random strangers, and they've lost the ability to exist privately. The powerful person treats social media like a scalpel rather than a sledgehammer. They post rarely but meaningfully. They share victories without humble bragging and insights without lecturing. They engage with others' content selectively, understanding that their attention is valuable currency that shouldn't be spent carelessly. Most importantly, they maintain clear separation between their public persona and their private reality. They understand that social media is a highlight reel, not a documentary, and they curate their online presence the same way a museum curator selects pieces for an exhibition. Not everything in their life belongs in the public collection. When controversy arises online, and it will because that's the nature of public platforms, they handle it with the same principles we've discussed. They don't engage with bad faith arguments. They don't try to correct every misrepresentation. They let their work speak for itself and their character be judged by people who actually know them. This approach requires emotional maturity that most people haven't developed. It requires the ability to watch people misunderstand you, misrepresent you, or even attack you without feeling compelled to correct the record. It requires the deep confidence that comes from knowing who you are regardless of what others think about who you are. But the payoff is extraordinary. While others are trapped in endless cycles of reactivity, constantly defending themselves from attacks that barely register in the real world, you're building actual value and cultivating real relationships. While they're hemorrhaging energy through 1,000 small cuts of social media drama, you're accumulating power through consistent focus on what actually matters. This brings us to perhaps the most sophisticated application of these principles, the art of strategic vulnerability. Most people think that being invulnerable means never showing weakness or emotion, but true invulnerability comes from choosing exactly when, where, and with whom you allow yourself to be vulnerable. It's the difference between leaking power unconsciously and investing it consciously. The strategically vulnerable person might share a meaningful struggle with a trusted friend while maintaining complete privacy about that same struggle in professional settings. They might show emotion in response to something truly important while remaining unmoved by trivial provocations. They understand that vulnerability is not a character trait, but a tool, one that becomes more powerful the more carefully it's deployed. This selective openness creates deeper connections with fewer people, while maintaining professional effectiveness with everyone else. It allows you to have genuine relationships without making yourself manipulable by everyone you encounter. It's the difference between being an open book and being a carefully curated library where only trusted people get access to the rare manuscripts. As we near the culmination of this philosophy, it's important to understand that what we're discussing isn't sociopathy or emotional shutdown. It's not about becoming cold or cruel or disconnected from others. It's about developing such a strong sense of self that you can engage with the world from a position of choice rather than reaction. The truly powerful person can be generous because they're giving from abundance rather than trying to purchase love through sacrifice. They can be kind because kindness is a choice they're making, not a compulsion they can't resist. They can be supportive because they want to help, not because they need to be needed. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote about the lion and the fox. The lion represents the ability to face direct challenges with strength and courage. The fox represents the intelligence to avoid unnecessary battles and navigate complex social dynamics. But combining these qualities requires a third element that Machiavelli implied but didn't explicitly name: the eagle's perspective. The eagle sees the entire landscape from above. It understands how all the pieces fit together. It can spot opportunities and threats long before they become obvious to ground-level players. It chooses its moments to engage and its moments to soar above the chaos. This elevated perspective is what allows truly powerful people to seem almost mystically prescient. They're not seeing the future, they're seeing the present more clearly than everyone else. They understand human nature well enough to predict how people will respond to different stimuli. They recognize patterns that others miss because they're not emotionally involved in every small drama and temporary crisis. Here's how this looks in practice. You're at a social gathering where someone starts gossiping about a mutual friend who isn't present. Everyone begins adding their own stories and opinions, creating a feeding frenzy of negativity. The group dynamics are pulling everyone into the shared activity of verbal destruction. The reactive person either joins in to fit in or objects morally to stand out. Both responses make them part of the drama. The powerful person does something different. They listen without contributing, then smoothly redirect the conversation when there's a natural pause. Speaking of Sarah, has anyone tried that new restaurant she recommended? This isn't done to protect Sarah, though it has that effect. It's done because participating in gossip diminishes you while adding nothing of value to your life. It's a strategic choice to remain above the fray while guiding the group toward more productive energy. People unconsciously register that you don't engage in character assassination, which makes them trust you more and fear you slightly. Both reactions serve your interests. But the deeper principle here is about energy management. Most people let their emotional energy be drained by whatever demands their attention. They react to every provocation, engage with every argument, and respond to every invitation for drama. By the end of the day, they're exhausted from battles that didn't matter, carrying stress from conflicts that weren't theirs to resolve. The person who has mastered these principles operates from a completely different energy economy. They conserve their emotional resources for situations that actually matter. They engage deeply with people and projects that deserve their full attention while remaining efficiently polite with everything else. This isn't coldness, it's resource management at the highest level. The result is that when they do choose to engage fully, when they bring their complete attention and energy to a situation, the impact is extraordinary. Because they haven't been scattered across a dozen meaningless interactions, they can bring concentrated force to the moments that count. This creates a reputation for exceptional performance while actually requiring less energy than the scattered approach most people use. This philosophy culminates in what we might call the invisible throne, a position of influence that doesn't require title, recognition, or formal authority. The person on the invisible throne leads through attraction rather than coercion, influences through example rather than argument, and commands respect through competence rather than position. They don't need to tell people they're powerful because power radiates from their presence. They don't need to demand loyalty because people naturally want to be associated with someone who has their life under such obvious control. They don't need to fight for respect because they've made themselves genuinely respectable. This is the ultimate Machiavellian achievement, becoming so psychologically self-sufficient and strategically competent that the world rearranges itself around you without you having to force anything. People seek your approval rather than you seeking theirs. Opportunities come to you rather than you chasing opportunities. Problems solve themselves in your presence because people don't want to disappoint someone they respect. But perhaps the most profound aspect of this philosophy is what it does to your relationship with fear. Most people live in constant anxiety about other people's opinions, reactions, and judgments. They modify their behavior to avoid conflict, minimize their goals to avoid failure, and dilute their authentic expression to avoid rejection. When you've developed genuine psychological self-sufficiency, these fears lose their power over you. Not because you become reckless or indifferent to consequences, but because you've built an internal foundation that can't be shaken by external circumstances. You still care about outcomes, but your sense of worth isn't dependent on any particular outcome occurring. This freedom from fear-based decision-making is perhaps the greatest gift you can give yourself. It allows you to take calculated risks that others won't take, to pursue opportunities that others are too scared to pursue, and to maintain your principles even when doing so is temporarily costly. The person who has achieved this level of psychological independence doesn't worry about being liked by everyone because they've surrounded themselves with people who genuinely appreciate them. They don't fear failure because they've learned to extract value from every experience. They don't worry about being understood by everyone because they've developed the confidence that comes from understanding themselves. This is the final destination of this philosophy, not the accumulation of power over others, but the achievement of complete power over yourself. Because when you've mastered your own mind, emotions, and reactions, when you've developed the ability to see clearly and respond strategically regardless of external pressure, when you've built an unshakable center that remains calm in any storm, then you've acquired something that no one can take from you and nothing can destroy. You've become truly dangerous, not because you wish harm to others, but because you've made yourself immune to the psychological manipulations that control most people. You've stepped out of the game of emotional reactivity and into the realm of conscious choice. You've stopped being a victim of circumstances and become an architect of your own destiny. And in the end, this is what real power looks like. Not the ability to control others, but the complete ownership of your own mind, emotions, and choices. Not the capacity to force outcomes, but the wisdom to create value so consistently that favorable outcomes become inevitable. Not the need to prove your worth to anyone, but the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you've built something unbreakable within yourself. The world will test this foundation constantly. People will try to provoke you back into reactivity, to pull you down into drama, to make you prove yourself to them over and over again. And every time you respond with calm competence instead of emotional reactivity, every time you choose strategic silence over defensive explanation, every time you demonstrate that your peace is non-negotiable and your standards are uncompromising, you'll feel the difference. You'll understand, finally, what it means to be genuinely powerful in a world full of people who mistake noise for strength and reaction for authenticity. You'll recognize that true influence flows from internal mastery, and that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who has nothing to prove and everything to protect. You'll realize that you've spent your entire life learning the wrong lessons about power, and that everything changes when you finally understand the rules of the game. Everyone else is playing unconsciously. This is your invitation to step into that understanding, to claim that power, and to discover what becomes possible when you stop being at the mercy of other people's emotions and start operating from an unshakable foundation of self-mastery. The choice, as always, is yours, but now you know what the choice actually means.